Robert Kennedy Jr. sparked controversy this week when he came out and said that Health and Human Services was planning to ban petroleum-based dyes found in food products. Many food companies were up in arms about this announcement, with one CEO saying, quote, "If we can't put red dye number 40 in those sugary balls of poison we call children's cereal, how are kids supposed to get their daily recommended serving of petroleum? What do you mean kids aren't supposed to eat petroleum? If that was true, then why the hell are we putting it in the food? This interview is over." End quote. And if that excitement wasn't enough, RFK then made heads explode by announcing that he has plans to find the cause of autism by September, even if that journey involves a shirtless trek through the Amazon to find the shaman who holds the cure. RFK said he's the man for the job. I, for one, am all for it. Some people have accused me of having a touch of the tism, and if RFK can come to my house and give me a shot that makes people less annoying while preventing food companies from trying to poison me, I'm all for it. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. We got a couple of nice topics today. We are going to be covering RFK and talking about food dyes as well as his autism cause search. And then we're going to be talking about the legacy of Pope Francis. But first, before we got that, we got a couple important announcements. First, Winnie wants to say hello. Oh, God, I bumped you in the mic. Say hello, Winnie. No? She never wants to talk when she's on the mic. I don't know what her deal is. She talks nonstop when she's on the floor and wants to get up, but then has nothing to say. I don't know. But first, we also have to talk about our favorite comment from last week. At JYT123-18C said, quote, "Oh, Harvard doesn't agree with my politics. Why do you have to pay them? I'm not a smart man. Explain it to me. Because some things are above politics and they create more value than you." End quote. I think you're a little muddled there, JYT123. If it's true that something creates plenty of value, then shouldn't they be able to do it without my money? You take that argument, which I just made, which is that people shouldn't be forced to fund programs that they don't agree with, and then say that they must fund them because they create so much value. Well, you must obviously be talking about something other than monetary value, because if it had monetary value, then it should be able to compete in a free market without subsidization. So I'm not 100% sure what you meant, although it does seem insulting. So, but I'm sure you're just a little confused on the topic there, because like I said, if it really creates value, then why do I need to fund it? And if I should fund it for a moral reason, then why are you bringing value into the equation? What sense does that make? Turn this mic up a little bit. I feel like I'm really quiet. Anyway, okay, so on to topic number one, RFK's mission. RFK, whatever you think about Robert Kennedy Jr., he is consistent. He's a very consistent person. He has been talking about the topics that he is in charge of now for decades. You can look back. You can see interviews of him done throughout the years. He is very consistent on a number of topics, making people healthy, the environment, his vaccine. I'll call it skepticism, but I don't know if – I feel like that word is wrapped in so much stigma. It might not be the most appropriate term for him, but I'll say vaccine skepticism. I'll say that. But he's consistent. He's consistent on all of these topics. And before we get into the sort of nitty-gritty of what happened this week, I want to just say that the Make America Healthy Again goal is a great goal. America is an incredibly unhealthy country. Corporations, companies have been doing a good job of making great, terrible food. It seems like a contradiction, but it's not. I tell people all the time, I'm not opposed to junk food. I love, who doesn't love like chips and candy and pizza? This stuff, it's delicious. It's designed to be delicious. It is absolutely has an addictive quality to it. Like, have you ever had the taste you're like, man, it's weird. I really crave some specific thing from some specific place. Oh, I really want a cheeseburger. And then you're like, well, I don't want just any cheeseburger. I want a McDonald's cheeseburger. Or I want a pizza, but I don't want any pizza. I want a Domino's pizza, whatever it is, whatever your thing is. It's because that stuff, it plays on the same centers of your brain that addiction plays on. So the same kind of opiate addictive pathways, it's not exactly hitting those, but it plays on the same area of your brain that makes you want to be dependent on a thing. Those dopamine hits that you get, that serotonin release that you get from these things, it is designed to make you want them. And they're bad for you. They are. Everyone knows this. It's not a mystery. And I don't hate any junk food in moderation. I think that's the big problem, is that stuff is designed to be addictive, which makes moderation hard. Like that whole Lay's potato chip, bet you can't eat just one, is a real thing. It is really hard. You can't eat just one potato chip because it's not playing to the same satiation factor that other foods play. It's like if you had an endless supply of ribeye in front of you. You're looking, and you can just eat as much steak as you want to eat. You're going to eat, and you're going to get full. And you're going to maybe possibly overeat a little bit, but it is incredibly difficult to do. It's not the same with a bag of chips. It doesn't have that same feeling of fullness that you get, so you just want to eat more. And they're not necessarily designed for that factor, but it's just because the food has no nutritional value. So your body doesn't hit that same feeling of being primed, being ready, that something like a steak will do. Steak has when you look at the list, it's very high on that factor, that satiation factor, where you eat and then you feel full and you stop eating. Whereas something like rice, for example, is not. That's why a lot of people talk when you talk about Chinese food, and the joke is you get hungry 30 minutes later. Well, that's true, because rice is actually very low on that list of feeling full for a long time. You just don't feel full when you eat bad food, and rice is not a great food, people, just so you know. Anyway, so I'm all for this mission that RFK is on, because America, we are obese, we are diabetic, we have high blood pressure, high cholesterol. This country is unhealthy, and there are so many factors at play that contribute to this. And so when he's trying to identify some of them and attack them, I am all for it. I think it's a great thing, and he's been very consistent on this. So this week, Health and Human Services announced that there are going to be 8 food dyes that are going to be eliminated by the end of next year. This is from both medications and food products. Health and Human Services said that FD&C blue, number 1 and 2, FD&C green, number 3, FD&C red, number 40, FD&C yellow, number 5 and 6, orange B, and citrus red, number 2. All of those dyes are on the chopping block. And one of these was already done, or another one was already done by the Biden administration under the current administration. It was red dye number 3, which was supposed to be phased out by 2027. So why is he going after food dyes in particular? Why is this one of the things, the first big headlines coming out of Health and Human Services? What is the reasoning for this? Well, there have been a number of studies that link that link these dyes to behavioral issues among children. It's not definitive, but it's some correlation causation type studies where they say, well, these kids have a high intake of whatever red dye number 40, and they say, well, they have behavioral issues. They're manifesting with higher rates of ADHD and depression or anxiety, whatever the case may be. I think OCD was one of them that they're listed, but there's a good case to be made, or at least a case to be made. I won't necessarily say a good case, but a case to be made that there are links to neurological issues in children, our behavioral issues in children. So, so you say, why are we banning it? But I actually have a better question to the people who are asking, why should we ban these things? Which is, why should we allow these things to exist? Why should we allow these food dyes to go into our product? Because they've gotten rid of them in other countries. These dyes do not exist in Great Britain. They don't exist in Australia. They don't exist in New Zealand. Why do they exist in the United States? Because the Food and Drug Administration, they have approved 36 separate food dyes. 9 of these 36 food dyes are made from petroleum, which I don't know if you know this. Petroleum is not a food product. You shouldn't be eating it. It's not good. It's not good for you to ingest, but it's made with that. And they say, well, it's trace amounts. It's trace amounts that are used to create these dyes. It's not you excrete it through the diet, or it's not absorbed, or part of the process when we're making it burns it off, whatever the case is. They're saying, well, it's not really that big of a deal because it's under the limit for the amount of petroleum that's allowed in food products. So just because it's made from petroleum doesn't mean that it hits the limit of toxicity. Other food dyes are made from natural sources, like vegetables, and this seems fine to me. You can use beets, you can use carrots to create food coloring that you use to dye food. This is what they do in other countries, but not here. Not here. We use petroleum-based products. So the FDA has approved these food dyes. They have allowed these food dyes to grow forward. Now, let me, for example, walk you through the process as it should be done in the FDA. If you want to approve a drug, if I come up with a drug, I say I've invented a miracle pill, and I want to market it to the American public because I've invented a pill that cures all illness. What do I have to do to go through the FDA approval process? Well, I have to have a series of studies. It costs millions, tens of millions of dollars to study this drug to prove that it is safe and effective and that the side effects are minimal or outweighed by the benefits of the drugs. I have to fund all this. I have to get all this. I have to go to the FDA. I have to go through an approval process. And again, it's going to cost me tens of millions of dollars to develop this drug in the first place, and then more to get through the FDA approval process. This is how any drug in the country is run. Food, the food part of the FDA, is treated more like supplements, it seems like, where supplements... So you go to the store and you buy that big thing with the buff guy on it who's like, oh, you get my muscle milk and you make yourself strong. Supplements used to be treated like drugs. You used to have to do the same thing you have to do for drugs. You had to prove that they were safe and effective, and then you could take them to market. Now it's the opposite. Now supplements are treated like food. And what that is to say is I can market something on the thing as a supplement, or I could market it as a food product. And then the onus is on the FDA to prove that it is unsafe or unhealthy or dangerous, and then they take it off the market. That's how food is treated. So when they say the FDA has approved all these dyes, kind of, not really. It's not really the same process because, again, it's more like supplements where people can just market food products. They don't have to go take every food product they make and go to the FDA. The FDA is going to come in and look at things, and they do make rulings on certain things you can and can't do in food in general, and you have to comply to those rules. But again, if I wanted to market some snack cakes today from my kitchen here, and I just wanted to create a business and make some snack cakes, I don't have to get the FDA to approve me to do this. I can just do it. And then eventually somebody is going to, there might be a regulator that comes through who checks your food safety quality. But this is down the line. This is not the way that it works in general. Same with the restaurants. It's like if you go and you start a restaurant, you might have a baseline inspection, but then you just get to operate, and they might pop in and catch you, but that's just kind of the way it goes. So the FDA has allowed this process to go on. They've allowed petroleum to be in our food, and the question is, why would we want that? Why do we think that that's okay? And I don't know the answer to that. I know in other countries they don't allow the amount of junk that we put in the food that is not food. It's like when you're reading the back, I wish I just had an example, like a honey bun or something here. When you're reading the back of a product and you're reading the ingredients list, and the fact that you don't know how to pronounce and you don't know what most of the ingredients on your food is indicates that you're eating the wrong thing. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat junk food. I'm not a guy who is going to advocate against anyone ever indulging in junk food. I like chips. I like candy, all right? You're not going to catch me being the guy who's going to shame you for eating. But what you have to understand is that you know that it's not good for you. You know that. And so because of that, you have to eat it in moderation. Or you have to move enough that what you eat doesn't lead you to developing health problems down the road. So you have to move enough to offset the calories so that you don't wind up being 400 pounds and developing a bunch of health problems. And yes, the food contributes to that. The food is made to be addictive. The food is full of a bunch of filler nonsense that is cheaply produced by companies and not healthy for you at all. Again, you read the list of the ingredients, and when they have names of things that you don't know, the hydrogenated oils on there, all of this garbage that is just pumped into your body, I'm all for Robert F. Kennedy finding a way to get some of the stuff that's unnecessary, because that's the other thing about this food dye. It's not necessary to the product. It's clearly just an aesthetic choice. because they want the red to look more red. So your Fruit Loops might be gray. I don't know. I don't know what color Fruit Loops are before they put the dye on there, but they might not be red or yellow or green, because Fruit Loops, these little sugary balls of poison, as we called them in the intro, are colored later. They're basically, they use this dye just to make them look bright and pretty, so you want to eat them, because if it was gray slop, you might actually not like what it looks like. So we don't need them. They're not necessary for the product other than a marketing thing and to make them look more appetizing. But if you need to put petroleum on the product to make it look appetizing, maybe you shouldn't be eating the product. That's all I'm going to say. Or there's no reason why you can't use beets and carrots to color them like you do in other countries. Oh, it makes it more expensive, you say? Well, you know what? I think that that's just an excuse. I don't actually think that that's the case. I think that you're making excuses because you've developed this thing that you can, again, you probably can make it slightly cheaper, but it doesn't mean that it's a good thing to do. You shouldn't be doing that to people, especially when they don't know, because you disguise the name in an ingredients list that's 50 things long to make the Fruit Loop that's this big. So anyway, I'm all for it. I'm all for this Make America Healthy Again thing. I think food companies they're basically as bad as the pharmaceutical industry with the amount of garbage that they pump into the American consumer every single year. So I'm all for Robert F. Kennedy finding ways to trim some of this poison out of our diet, because our diet is probably one of the things that is making us the most unhealthy country that has ever existed, ever. So yes, yes, yes. And I think he's tying this into his other big announcement this week, which is the autism thing. So Robert F. Kennedy, basically, he said autism is an epidemic, and he has vowed to find the environmental cause, the environmental toxin that is responsible by September of this year. So doing some quick math, September is the 9th month in the year. We're in April. That only leaves 5 months. That's less than half a year. Am I optimistic that he's going to be able to do this? No, I don't think so. And neither is Jay Bhattacharya, who said, well, really, we're going to get the research off the ground by September, but this thing's going to take another year at least before we get it, because there's a little slight controversy, because what they're going to do is pull health records from people and import them into this big thing, this big database they're developing to study autism. And I think I think this is a great thing, and we're going to talk about why. But basically, the Center for Disease Control, they did a report that says that the prevalence in the United States of autism has increased. It's gone from 1 in 36 5 years ago to 1 in 31. And this is up and up and up. Every 5 years when they're looking at it, it's just going up and up and up, and it has since the 70s. So if the autism rates are going up, and the National Institute of Health is spending upwards of $300 million a year researching autism, why is it not a reasonable thing for the Director of Health and Human Services to say that he wants to find the root cause of this? This made people so upset. And I think that it's just a completely misguided sense of outrage. Because really, when you think about it, there are 4 likely causes of the rise in autism rates in the United States. And so you have a couple things that are just very obvious. One might be an underdiagnosing of people in the past. So we just didn't call autism, or we didn't catch autism. We didn't give it the right diagnosis. So people were underdiagnosed in the past. There might be a bit of an overdiagnosing today, where we've expanded the spectrum of things that we consider autism to be things that historically we wouldn't have thought as autism. And so I kind of joked in the intro that people have said that I have some autistic traits. And I think that it's kind of a joke, but it's also kind of not, because that is real. That is kind of how it works, where I was just having a conversation actually last night with a friend of mine who was saying that there are things that she does that would be considered autistic. And then she said, and you're no better. And she pointed out some things that I do that she said, that would probably meet a definition for being autistic. And my point is that we've expanded the definition so that basically every kind of quirk or anything is some form of autism. It started with Asperger's, where I think they call that now stage 1 or group 1. But it's like everything. So it's an overdiagnosing of the problem. That's not to say there's not a rise in more serious cases of autism. It's just to say that also we're catching these fringe people on the spectrum who for lack of a better term, historically may have been quite quirky or weird, and now they're just, they're autistic. Okay, whatever the case may be. So those are two. And then you have a third possibility, which is that there is an environmental factor to this. I don't think a reasonable person would deny that this is the most likely cause. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm missing. But from what I see, that has been a big change. The amount of things that people are exposed to, both pregnant mothers, so baby in utero, and also young people outside of the womb as they develop. The amount of environmental factors that they are exposed to has increased dramatically from 100 years ago. So I think that there absolutely could be an environmental factor. So when Robert F. Kennedy says he wants to find the environmental factor, I'm all for it. And the fourth cause could be that we've hit some sort of genetic bottleneck where we're just going to get this genetic component of autism that is more and more prevalent because there's, again, a genetic bottleneck that's happened here in Western civilization. Now, when you talk about autism, I'm all for trying to find a way to prevent it. And I know that that's not going to make me very popular among some people. When RFK announced that he wanted to do this, they were so upset by this, as though it's somehow a slur against autistic people to say it would be better if most people didn't have autism. And like that's some sort of hate crime to say that about people. And I don't understand the argument here, because the reality is that if you have a child born and you have the ability to say, well, this child could be born without legs, or this child could have fully functional legs. And you say, well, I would never want I have another child who was born without legs, and how dare you say that a child without legs is of lesser value than a child with legs, or blah, 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 whatever it is that they say. Well, no, the idea is that a child is better off when they are born able to have a more fully functional life. That's all that people are saying. It's not an attack against autistic people. It's not an attack against people who care for autistic people or love autistic people. The same way saying it would be better, for example, if you found a cure for Down syndrome, it would be better to have children who are born who are not Down syndrome children. It's not an attack against people with Down syndrome. It's not to say that they can't live lives and be functional and have jobs even in a lot of cases. It's not to say that. But if you're dealing with somebody who at a certain level has an IQ and they are functionally retarded, it would be better if that person was not was above that line of IQ. And I can't remember if it's 80 or 70 that separates the cutoff. But if you have a choice in your child, you could say, well, your child's going to be born with a 75 IQ, or your child is going to be born with the national average of 100 in the IQ range. And you just said, well, I love my child the same no matter what. That's great. And I know that you do. But your child would be better off and have more opportunities in life if they were born with a higher IQ. That's just the way it is. And so attacking people, quote unquote, attacking people for saying that it would be better to be born not autistic. And again, there are a lot of autistic people who are great, and it's great that you love them and you care for them and they can function. I'm sure a lot of people out there have probably seen that Love on the Spectrum show, and those guys, you say, that's fantastic, that's great. But you know who's not on that show are the type 3 autistic people who are nonverbal, can't function, can't hold a job, never have had a conversation in their life. That is what we're talking about. Those are the people that we wish we could give them an open and more full life. And it's not mean or mean-spirited to say that. And so attacking RFK for this is just, it's kind of ridiculous. And I don't understand why people would be upset. Because, by the way, and a lot of people are saying it's because there is no cure. It's simply genetics. And I don't know how you can definitively say that. I really don't. Because there are obviously things that can affect the genetic component of your child that are not necessarily genetic traits that you have inherited from your parents. And what I mean by that is there are obviously things that can change the genetics of people now. That's just the way it is. For example, we know that we can do this through technology like CRISPR. So what is to make you believe that it is impossible, that there's an environmental factor that could play a genetic component in children. So, you're exposed to something while you're pregnant, or you yourself have ingested some toxin that then changes the makeup of the fetus that you're carrying or that you will carry in the future, and then this person is born with some sort of disability. We know that this happens. We know that there are different things, environmental factors, that can change the outcome and the makeup of children. We know this. So why would anyone oppose this is my question. This is such an obvious thing. Autism is clearly becoming more prevalent in the world. Trying to find the root cause of that seems like a good idea to me, and it seems like a worthwhile endeavor, especially when we're already spending $300 million a year just through the National Institute of Health on this one thing. So, yes, I'm all for it. I think it would be great. And imagine that RFK does. Imagine that the study does. I'm not saying this is likely, but imagine that they come up with it and they say, hey, we found it. We figured it out. It's exposure to red dye 40. It did it. That's what we figured it out. We just got to take that out of the system completely. And you'd say, wow, that's crazy. People are upset, I guess, because he throws vaccines in there as a possibility. But he's not saying that that's what it is. He said we're going to explore all environmental factors. We're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about the environment. We're going to talk about vaccines. We're going to talk about this. He wants to explore every avenue. And yes, allow me to be controversial. Yes, vaccines should be a part of it because it's something that has changed in the last 50 years, the amount of vaccines we give children. I'm not saying vaccines cause autism. That is not something I'm saying. I don't think that there's science that supports that. However, it is a factor that you should explore because it's something that's changed in newborn children. And that's what we're trying to look at. Environmental factors from pregnancy through the age that autism develops in children. Anything that has changed from 1970 to now should be explored. One of the things that changes is the course of vaccines that people use in the last 60 years. So yes, that should absolutely be explored. It's not controversial to say that, but yet it is, because people think that there was a study that was done that linked vaccines to autism that's been debunked, and I think the guy who wrote it actually lost his medical license for being a quack. And they say, well, that's just because you're following bad science. No, I'm not. I'm not following any science because I just said I don't think that that's the likely root cause. However, it is a factor that should be explored. And there's nothing wrong with studying it, especially because if you study it more, what you'll find is that you can either disprove it or prove it. And if you disprove it, then there's just more proof to the side that vaccines don't cause autism. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think people just get upset because they don't like RFK. And they don't like RFK because they don't like Donald Trump and they don't like his administration. It's not because of what he's doing. It's just that anything he does is going to be taboo, and they're not going to approve it. And they're going to say he's a monster. How dare he say that autism should be cured? How dare he make autistic people seem less than? Okay, people, why don't we calm down? Everyone knows what we mean. Everyone knows. And to pretend to be outraged as though it's some great crime to say that a person who has to live under the constant care of family or in an institution because they're nonverbal and cannot hold a job or a conversation or be functional in society, that making it so that that person has a better life in the future for future people who may not have to be born with that condition, as if that's some sort of attack. It just drives me crazy because it's so clearly not hateful to say that. It's actually very compassionate to say that you want people to live better lives. But yet they can't see it because the person exists. And it's the same problem all over again. We talked about Down syndrome. It's like if you have a Down syndrome person in your life, obviously you love that person, and obviously you should, because that's what family does. We love the people who are close to us. But to say that, again, if you could make that person not necessarily have the chromosomal condition that afflicted them, if you could take that away or give them the IQ of Albert Einstein and you say no because I love who they are, well, you're actually being the person who's in the wrong there. And it's not hateful to say that. It's just saying the same way you wouldn't want a person to be born without legs or to be born with spina bifida. It's the same as any of these conditions. It's a deviation from normality in a way that only negatively impacts people. It doesn't positively impact people. It's not something that makes people live fuller lives in 99.99% of cases. So If you can give the future generation an opportunity for a fuller life, you should. And it's selfish and short-sighted not to. Anyway, okay, we're going to leave that one there. And I want to briefly talk about topic 2. Topic 2, Pope Francis. Let's talk about his legacy. And there's a reason why we are going to talk about this. Even if you aren't a Catholic, this is important because Christianity is the largest religion in the world. And Catholics make up the majority of that religion. I just looked it up this morning because I was curious. And it says there's over 2 billion Christians in the world. There's about 1.8 billion Muslims, which make those number 1 and 2 on the largest world religions. And I knew that Christianity was first, but I wanted to see where it compared to Islam. So I think it's 0.3 or 0.4 billion more than Islam. So Christianity is still number 1. But then I was surprised because I said, but how many Christians are Catholic? Because that I actually didn't know the answer to. And I was very surprised that it is 1.4 billion of them are Catholic. So 1.4 billion Christians of the 2+ billion are Catholic. And I was actually surprised by that. I didn't realize that the majority of Christians are actually Catholic. I for some reason thought that the Catholic-Protestant split would be more 50-50 or maybe even in favor of Protestants at this time, and I was very mistaken because it's still in favor of Catholics. So that's kind of why we're talking about this, because Catholicism has a huge impact on the world, and the Pope is obviously a very important figure worldwide for what amounts to billions of people. So even if you aren't Catholic, knowing about the Pope is kind of important. So we're going to do a little history on the Pope. Pope Francis was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Argentina. But he's Italian. His father was Italian. His grandparents are Italian. He's of Italian heritage. He just was born in Argentina. And he was the Pope. He's been the Pope for the last 12 years. He was ordained the Pope in 2013. Francis was an interesting character because he was known, on one hand, he was known as being very charitable. He lived an austere lifestyle. He had a preoccupation with the poor. He was very, very concerned about the plight of the poor in the world. And kindness was kind of his thing. This was what he was known for. He was just a very compassionate person. And he did some things that other popes haven't done. So he lived a much less lavish lifestyle. He kept instead of wearing the signature red of the Pope, he would keep his white. He didn't upgrade. A lot of the popes get this gold cross that they wear. He kept his silver one from when he was a cardinal. Same with his signet ring. He kept a silver one. He didn't go gold. He moved out of the Pope Palace. I can't remember what the name of it is, but where the popes live in this big palace, and he lives in a much more part of Vatican City that's a much more regular, it's called a guest house, basically. And so he was kind of known as this Pope who wanted to reform the church and get back a little bit more to the roots and away from this preoccupation with tradition and the stuffiness of Catholicism, and he wanted to return it to the people. So it's kind of he wanted to think of himself as a reformer, a Catholic reformer of that kind of stuff. And I think that's a good thing for the Pope. I do. I think that it's a good thing to display that kind of humility. I think that that's what people want from their religious leaders. They don't necessarily want to throw some hate out there, but the prosperity gospel people, the Joel Osteens of the world. A lot of people don't want to follow that guy because there's something kind of icky about a priest or a pastor who flies around in private jets and wears $5,000 suits. There's something kind of untoward about that people just don't appreciate. So Pope Francis went away from that. He went back and tried to live a more humble life even when he ascended to the highest seat in Catholicism. And that was kind of his it. But he was very controversial among Catholics. And I think, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on the recently deceased Pope because I'm trying not to. He wasn't my favorite Pope. I think that he did some things that I really don't approve of as the head of the Catholic Church. I think that the Catholic Church should stay out of politics more. And he talked a lot outside of his role as the vicar of Christ and dove more into the political realm, which I don't really love the church to get into on many issues. Whether it's talking about immigration or speaking out about Donald Trump's policies or environmentalism, I think that the Vatican signing a treaty with Palestine is a terrible thing. Why would you do this? And I also think he did things like allowed the Chinese Communist Party to select Chinese bishops. Why are you doing this? Why are you giving the Chinese Communist Party access into the church? They hate the church. They don't want the church to exist. And what they're doing probably is placing Chinese spies within the Catholic Church. You don't give them access to the church. Don't do that. Or restricting the Latin Mass. Why would you do this? There's many Catholics who want to go to the Latin Mass. Why would you say that you don't want your diocese to partake in the Latin Mass anymore? I don't like that kind of stuff at all. So I think that he's going to go down in history with a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of some people are going to love him for some of the good things that he did, this humility that he brought to the Catholic Church that has been missing. I don't know, many people probably haven't been to St. Peter's Basilica, but if you ever get the chance to go to Vatican City and you ever get the chance to stand there, actually, hold on 1 second. As I'm saying this, let me go grab something. All right, so this is cool. I have a little collection. Get back here. I have a little collection of these from around the world, places I've been. But this is a rosary that I actually got at St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. It's one of those. They have a blesser. It's not actually the Pope who blesses the rosaries in the Vatican. They have a person who does the blessing for everything that they sell there. But I got that last year at St. Peter's Basilica. And what was I talking about? Why was I bringing that up? Oh, so I think if you have the opportunity to go to this place, what you'll notice is that there's a disconnect between how holy the Vatican feels and what it's supposed to represent. What I mean by that is that it feels more like Disneyland in a lot of the cases. You look at the Pope, he's got a throne that he sits on, and it is this gigantic golden monument. It looks like something out of Game of Thrones. And it felt kind of strange because it didn't feel like this place that is supposed to represent the core of spirituality for Christians. And I think that what Pope Francis was doing, that undertaking of returning some humility, some humbleness to the church, I think that was a good thing. And I think that part of his legacy, put this on, I think that part of his legacy will go down in history as a good thing. The rest of it, I don't know. I don't know how history is going to view his legacy in that regard. So we'll see. And you obviously, you can't write history in real time. You have to look back and see the impact and the legacy that people leave behind. And won't know that for years. So I think that the interesting question right now is who the next pope is going to be, and I'm not going to speculate. A lot of people don't know how the conclave works, and I'm not going to get into all that, but I think it'll be interesting. I think that there's a real chance that they're going to choose an African pope. I think that there's a rise in Catholicism happening in Africa right now, so what you might see, which would be interesting, would be the first black pope, and Francis was the first pope from the Southern Hemisphere. He was the first pope from the Americas. He was the first pope from Argentina. So he was the first of a lot of things, and I think that you might see another one of those. You might see the first black pope, and I think that it would be I think it would be ironic because a lot of people would look at that as progressive, but if there's an African pope, he is going to be the most conservative pope we've had in an incredibly long time. It'll be like a lot of people forgetting or trying to pretend away that the first black Supreme Court justice was Clarence Thomas, who is one of the most conservative members to sit on the bench. And I think that the Pope would kind of be like that. I don't know if that's going to be, I won't say it's the most likely case, but I think it's a likely case. So anyway, we're not going to speculate too much, though. because we'll know in about 3 weeks. So anyway, we're going to leave it there for the week. As always, people, questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments below, and I try and respond as I can. And I hope you guys have a great week. I will catch you next Friday.